You're listening to the Out of Bounds Show podcast, powered by the Honey Buttered Chicken Biscuit at Burgers, Blues, and Barbecue. That's right, open for breakfast in Madison. The Honey Buttered Chicken Biscuit or the Chicken and Waffles or even a breakfast bowl at Burgers, Blues, and Barbecue in Madison.
WRKS Pickens Jackson.
All systems go.
Live from the Whiskey 61 Lounge inside the BankPlus Studio.
This is Out Warning.
Live in the studio. It's the Out of Bounds Show with blowouts. Streaming live worldwide on the Out of Bounds radio app. And on your radio at ESPN 105.9.
All set? Let's go.
The Zone.
Oh, good morning. Welcome in. It is a cold one out there on a Monday morning. Out of Bounds, ESPN 105.9 The Zone. Live and local on WRKS and streaming worldwide on the Out of Bounds radio app. Nothing happened over the weekend to talk about, so this might be a quiet show today. Here in the BankPlus Studio, I am Blake Scott, filling in for the incomparable one, Mr. Bo Bounds, out on assignment. Getting the job done. We're going to get the job done here in the BankPlus Studio today. Should be quite an interesting show as we recap the first round of the NFL playoffs. And we talk a little college football recruiting and maybe look ahead to a little college baseball as well. This is Out of Bounds, ESPN 105.9 The Zone, and the Out of Bounds Show always brought to you, of course, by Farm Bureau Insurance. That's right, Farm Bureau Insurance. Go with the home team. Check out a rate today. Get with your local Farm Bureau Insurance agent. They'll take care of you. Farm Bureau Insurance. Of course, the Farm Bureau Insurance call-in line, 601-707-3750. 601-707-3750. If you want to be a part of the show on the Farm Bureau call line. We also have the Mississippi Ag, now Ag Up equipment. Ag Up text line, 601-885-3776. If you want to be a part of the show, voice your opinions on what you witnessed this weekend on the gridiron across the NFL. Of course, we had a little college basketball as well, as both State and Ole Miss played. I'm sure you guys were locked into that one. But an exciting weekend for some fan bases, and for others, it was a quick and unexpected end to the football season. That's right. As teams like the Patriots, the Raiders, the Eagles, and yes, even your Dallas Cowboys rode off into the sunset, albeit somewhat unceremoniously, as the Cowboys fall short to the 49ers, 23-17, a chance for a game-winning touchdown as time expires. Does not happen, and I'm sure all of you saw the way that game ended. We'll get your thoughts on that as the day progresses, and we'll unpack everything that went into that decision there at the end of the Cowboys-49ers game. Again, Dak and the Cowboys fall short to the 49ers, and Kyle Shanahan 23-17. We want to get your thoughts. 601-885-3776 is the Ag Up Equipment text line. It should be quite an interesting show. We're going to get into a little Ole Miss football recruiting and Mississippi State recruiting as well, as we welcome in David Johnson, Rebels 247 Insider. A little bit later today, 8:15, David Johnson will be joining the show. Going to talk a little bit about a pretty big visit this weekend. That's Jaxson Dart, former Southern Cal quarterback, now in the transfer portal, will be heading somewhere. The question is, where will he be heading? Will it be Ole Miss? Will it be somewhere else? That's Lane Kiffin trying to ink that signature as Lane was back in the Magnolia State this weekend, in Oxford, in the snow, recruiting Southern Cal quarterback Jaxson Dart. So I'm sure Ole Miss fans excited to see Kiffin back in the saddle in Oxford this weekend. But really the story of the day, so to speak, it's the NFL playoffs, and I think there's a couple ways to break it down. First, outside of Bengals, Raiders, and Cowboys, 49ers, boy, those other three games were pretty handed beatdowns. So The Bills break NFL records and score a touchdown on their first 7 drives against the Patriots and Bill Belichick, that vaunted defense in the freezing cold tundra of Buffalo. The Bills absolutely dominate Belichick and the Patriots, and it was a brutal end to the season for Mac Jones and that New England football team, but I'm sure they'll be back. But a blowout there, and then a blowout in Tampa Bay, and the Buccaneers, Tom Brady, handle Philadelphia and Jalen Hurts, who was dealing with some ankle injuries, had a walking boot on after the game. Jalen Hurts and the Eagles fall short pretty handily. And then Kansas City takes it to the Steelers. Pittsburgh and Big Ben Roethlisberger. No match for Kansas City and Patrick Mahomes as they rout the Steelers in what could be Ben Roethlisberger's, what probably will be Ben Roethlisberger's final game in the NFL. And it asks an interesting question. We look back at that 2004 NFL draft. Roethlisberger, the final piece, the final guy to hang him up. If you remember correctly, 2004, it was Eli Manning, number 1. And then it was who? Oh, that's right. His counterpart, Phillip Rivers, going to the New York Giants at number 4. Those two teams switched, Giants and Chargers. Obviously, Eli's career would be incredibly different if he had been in San Diego at the time. Rivers in New York. Would have been interesting to see how that plays out, but instead it's Eli to the Giants and Rivers to the Chargers. They are both hung it up, and now finally the last guy in that class, Ben Roethlisberger. 3 Hall of Fame quarterbacks probably. Eli and Ben for sure. Phillip Rivers right there in terms of longevity and career stats. Obviously did not have the postseason success that others would have liked, but Phillip Rivers, Eli Manning, both retired now. Ben Roethlisberger expected to hang him up in the offseason. The final piece, the 11th pick to the Pittsburgh Steelers out of Miami of Ohio that year in 2004. And now 19 seasons later, he's hung him up after an incredible career, 2 Super Bowls, a handful of playoff runs, just dominant decade and a half, nearly 2 decades for Ben Roethlisberger and the Pittsburgh Steelers, and so they are done as well. We have one more NFL game tonight. The first ever NFL Monday Night Football playoff game features the Cardinals and the Rams, 2 NFC West teams battling it out for a chance to take on Tampa Bay and Tom Brady down in Florida. It should be quite a good one tonight. Kyler Murray, Matt Stafford. It's going to be quite a matchup. Kingsbury, McVay, 2 young minds. This is what the NFL is all about. This is what it's about. It's you fight 18 weeks now with the added game. 17 games, 18 weeks. You fight, scratch, claw your way for an opportunity to play in the NFL playoffs. And here it is tonight. Kyler Murray and Matthew Stafford. Stafford, after an entire career in Detroit, finally getting an opportunity to play in the Promised Land. We'll see if the Rams and Matty Stafford can make it happen tonight. That game will be on ESPN and ABC. You won't want to miss it. This is the Out of Bounds Show, ESPN 105.9 The Zone. As you can tell, I am not Bo Bounds, Blake Scott, filling in for the incomparable one. We want you to be a part of the show. Weigh in with your thoughts from the weekend. 601-885-3776 is the Ag Up Equipment text line. 601-885-3776. Your thoughts on the ending to the Cowboys game. Your thoughts on Joe Burrow. 1-0 in the playoffs, baby. Kid is a gamer. He's a winner, people. Get on the Bengals bandwagon. No more Ben Roethlisberger. Browns are browning. Ravens are struggling. It's Cincinnati's future, folks. Cincinnati's future. We're just living in it. This is the Out of Bounds Show, ESPN 105.9 The Zone. Be a part of the show today. We've got a lot in store. As well as we jump into the big board next, we'll talk a little bit of QB discussion and why Lane Kiffin made the trek back from Boca this weekend. It's an important reason. This is the Out of Bounds Show, brought to you, of course, by Farm Bureau Insurance. Schedule your meeting today. Farm Bureau Insurance, go with the home team. Out of bounds, ESPN 105.9 The Zone. Big board coming up next. You're listening to the Out of Bounds Show, fueled by Fleetway Market. Whether you're on the road to the tailgate or headed up to hunting camp, stop by Fleetway Market to fuel up the car and the cooler today.
What's on the big board?
Oh, man. Hostile work environments today across the state of Texas as the Dallas Cowboys fall 23-17 to the San Francisco 49ers, and this makes 11 straight playoff appearances without reaching the NFC title game. Really, you might be asking yourself the question, how have they only had 11 appearances over the last 26 years? But also another question for another day. This is the Out of Bounds Show, ESPN 105.9 The Zone. Blake Scott filling in for the incomparable Bo Bounce. Excited to have you alongside us here in the BankPlus Studio and the Out of Bounds Show, the big board, brought to you by Kessler Prime and the Renaissance, KesslerPrime.com. To make a reservation, get you a perfectly cooked medium rare bone-in ribeye, side of jumbo lump crab. You got to do the asparagus. Of course, you get the fries. The Parmesan peppercorn dressing. Maybe start off with the tamales. Those are always fantastic. And, of course, the crab claws. All at Kessler Prime in the Renaissance. Make a reservation today. Get your steak on at Kessler Prime in the Renaissance, KesslerPrime.com. The overwhelming story across the sports world, what went wrong in Dallas? We'll be diving into that all day long as we kind of unpack the NFL playoffs. Of course, we're going to jump into some Ole Miss and Mississippi State football and basketball. We do want to touch on that. Ole Miss loses to number 4 Auburn in a tight one. The Rebels had a chance to win that one late. Couldn't quite hold on as Kermit and the crew drop a heartbreaker 80-71 to the number 4 Auburn Tigers, coached by who? The man himself, Bruce Pearl. That's right. Old Barbecue Bruce. Rebels were up 44-38 at the half, but got outscored 42-27 in the second half and dropped that game 80-71. Ole Miss now 9-7, 1-3 in SEC play, but their one comes against who? Mississippi State. That's right. Mississippi State got a big win. Ben Howland staying the executioner. 78-76. The Bulldogs come from behind at the half to beat Alabama by 2. Alabama, Nate Oates' crew, number 24 in the country. Bulldogs now 3-1 in SEC play, 12-4 overall. At the end of the day, Kermit's not going anywhere. They just extended him. Ben Howland's he's got one job. You got to get to the tournament somehow, some way. And when you get to the tournament, I got to be honest, it's not his fault. You probably need to win one. Probably need to win one if you're Ben Howland to keep cashing those checks in Starkville, Mississippi. Dogs a winner, 78-76. A good win at home over a top 25 team. Ole Miss just couldn't quite hold on against another elite opponent, number 4 Auburn. So we'll see how these two teams respond as those games go on. Look, State and Ole Miss will play each other here in another, I think, week and a half or so. They match back up again. So interesting that the Bulldogs and Rebels play so tightly together in this college basketball season, but they'll be back on the hard court sooner than later. Another interesting story around the football world. Jaxson Dart in Oxford this weekend took a picture with Lane Kiffin outside of, I guess that was either on campus or Kiffin's house. It's hard to see. There was snow everywhere. It was making the most of the snowy days in Oxford, Mississippi. And they were standing outside of, what kind of car does Kiffin drive? I don't know. Find that picture for me, Will. They were standing outside of a car. I assume it was Kiffin's. It didn't look like, I didn't think it was a Porsche logo. I wasn't paying attention too much, but Jaxson Dart and Kiffin posing in front of Kiffin's vehicle, I assume. I guess it could have been Jackson's. I don't know. Depends on if he's coming, right? And Kiffin in the Ole Miss hoodie. We run the SIP. Jaxson Dart in his hoodie. Just two kids hoodieing up. Lane Kiffin, friend of the player, out there recruiting. I know Ole Miss fans are excited to see him back in Oxford. It's been a little bit of a nervous couple weeks as Kiffin's had to fill his OC, DC, running backs coach. And look, he's still on the look for a DC. Or, in theory, the position's still open. He might be on the look. He might have decided on Chris Partridge and his brother, Chris Kiffin. Little combo, Chris and Chris. Ole Miss fans, how would you feel right now if I told you your DCs are going to be Chris Kiffin and Chris Partridge in a combo role for 2022? Your thoughts, 601-885-3776. That's the Ag Up Equipment text line, 601-885-3776. Your thoughts on Ole Miss if they were to decide, if Lane Kiffin decides to promote from within, how do you feel about Chris Partridge and Chris Kiffin running your defense as co-DCs in Oxford? That's on the rumor mill. I want to know what your thoughts are. I think you got to go outside the building. Ole Miss and State are too good of programs to promote from within unless it's a very specific circumstance. It's got to be a very specific circumstance. You're not, and look, I don't think Alabama and Clemson, those programs aren't supposed to be doing it either. But we've seen what has happened before when you promote from within. It can be a very slippery slope. Text line says Kiffin and Jaxson Dart were hanging out in front of an Aston Martin. Little 007 action, huh? Little 007? Lane Kiffin? See the golden gun? Come on now. Kiffin. Lane Kiffin. I think that's how it goes. Shaken, not stirred, right, guys? 601-885-3776 is the Ag Up Equipment text line. I want to get your thoughts on the weekend. Cowboys losers again in the divisional round, or excuse me, the wild card round. Didn't even make the divisional round. Losers again in the wild card round. Do not make the NFC title for a NFL record 11th straight postseason trip. And now the Cowboys. A lot of questions in Fort Worth, eh? What's going to happen? McCarthy, will he be there? Will Quinn? Will Kellen Moore? Could we have a whole, we expect one, if not both coordinators to go in Kellen Moore and Dan Quinn. Could the head coach be gone? What could be the case in Dallas? Jerry Jones unhappy with the way that game ended. And here's Jerry on, his feelings after the game yesterday.
When was the last time you were this disappointed after a loss?
I can't remember.
Short and sweet, Jerry. Just like the wins you had back in the 90s. Then you ran the program into the ground. Anybody feel bad for Jerry Jones? Anybody feel bad that Jerry's made billions on the back of a franchise that hasn't won in 20 plus years? There's a lot to be said about the decisions made across the board by the Cowboys over the last, 30 odd years, basically. But when you find out that Ezekiel Elliott has had a torn tendon in his knee and played the year the way they played him and still had more carries than Tony Pollard for most of the season, it blows your mind. It truly, truly blows your mind what's going on in Dallas. But such is the case sometimes in the NFL. The line between being great and being forgotten, it's thin when you're at the highest level. A lot of guys that could tell you stories about that. 601-885-3776, the Ag Up Equipment text line. Rolling in thoughts on Ole Miss hiring a DC, thoughts on the Cowboys game. We'll get to these texts and more. Got some delicious audio on the other side. You're not going to want to miss it. The Out of Bounds Show. Brought to you, of course, by BankPlus. We're live in the BankPlus Studio. BankPlus, it's more than a name, it's a promise. Find a location near you and do banking the right way. SEC Insider Hit coming up next.
The Out of Bounds Show podcast is presented by the Premium Cigars at Havana Smoke Shop. Visit their 2 locations, I-55 in Jackson and on the Res, for your premium cigar needs. Only at Havana Smoke Shop.
Come on.
Everyone ready?
This is the SEC Insider Hit. Presented by your local Farm Bureau Insurance agent. Go local. Go with a home team.
Out of Bounds, ESPN 105.9 The Zone. Live in the BankPlus Studio. And brought to you, of course, by Farm Bureau Insurance. Go local. Go with the home team. Schedule a meeting with your local Farm Bureau Insurance agent today. Save some money. Get your insurance handled the right way. Car, home, auto. Farm Bureau Insurance. Out of Bounds, ESPN 105.9 The Zone. I am Blake Scott, filling in for the man himself, the man, the myth, the legend, Bo Bounds, as the show must go on despite the fact that the Cowboys season does not. RIP expectations. Jerry Jones and the crew fall short again, 23-17. Your final score as time ran out on Dak and the Cowboys for a chance at a game-winning, well, it would have been a game-tying touchdown, and then the PAT, which had always been entertaining this year, would have been for the win. But alas, it was not to be, and as the text line has reiterated more than once this morning already, Jerry Jones might be the single biggest caveat to winning a Super Bowl the Cowboys have ever faced. PP, Mr. Pearl says, until Jerry is 6 feet under, the Cowboys have a true general manager and a coach who actually gets to make the calls. And then he adds a few other things. All the talent they have, they'll never win. They're playing in chains. And you're right. I mean, they're to some extent, there is some of that. I mean, the decisions that Jerry and that ownership group have made over the course of the last 20 years are suspect. It's a lot of questionable decisions. The Jalen Smith contract, the Zeke Elliott contract. 2 brutal decisions that cost your team because you don't have the ability to get other talent. It's an interesting situation in Dallas because I do believe Bo will tell you one thing, and I understand that. He can say what he wants to say. But the idea that Dan Patrick floated a few years ago about, Cowboys players are only talented because they play for the Cowboys, I agree with that 5 years ago, 6 years ago. This team is not the same as that team. There is bona fide, undisputable talent on that roster. And it was an abject failure to lose in the wild card round. But on the same hand, I would say there are other teams like that around the league where you go, you should be better than you are. You have more talent than your record shows. And then there are teams who have exceeded that expectation. I mean, the Steelers getting to the playoffs at all was incredibly impressive. The Raiders, with an interim head coach for more than half the season, is incredibly impressive. But what's going on in Dallas is it will continue to raise questions, and it will continue to create even more pressure on the Cowboys and their players, their coaches, their front office. I mean, you cannot continue to come up short the way they've come up short and not continue to ask more questions. 14 penalties for the Cowboys. Postseason team record. Now, I will say, look, again, it's incredible what happens to Dallas. Because of the notoriety of the brand, because of who they are and what they are, the officials, it's very interesting. When the Cowboys were good and they were winning a lot and they had kind of that name brand value of the triplets, Aikman, Irvin, and Smith, and you had the big dominating personality of Jimmy Johnson, sorry. The officiating, you could argue that there were calls that they got the Alabama treatment, so to speak, where calls went their way at times where maybe they wouldn't otherwise if they weren't as good a team. But the inverse appears to be true now. After 2 decades of losing, the officiating against Dallas is so statistically polarizing in one direction that it almost seems like it has to be a conscientious decision by the officials. When you have NFL offensive and defensive linemen, former retired NFL offensive and defensive linemen, posting shots of Trent Williams, the 49ers left tackle, jumping early 3 times, and all 3 times Randy Gregory is called for an offsides. I mean, the officiating has to be better. It's not why Dallas lost, but there's a clear issue with the officiating. We saw it in the Bengals-Raiders game. It may have cost the Raiders the game. An inadvertent whistle when Joe Burrow is rolling out to the left. Raiders players kind of stopped. Joe Burrow throws a touchdown. Officials get together, and they don't stop the play. They allow the touchdown to occur. Bengals end up winning by a score. And there you have it. That crew has now been kicked out of the playoffs. And rightfully so, but the inability to get the calls right is a frustrating one. And there's a multitude of problems in Dallas, way outside of just that. But it is something that needs to be addressed, and it is something that, just like the SEC has dealt over the last few years with a very, very poor image when it comes to officiating. The NFL they've got to address some level of accountability with the officiating. Out of bounds, ESPN 105.9 The Zone. This is the SEC Insider Hit, brought to you, of course, by Farm Bureau Insurance. Go local, go with the home team. Another great story around the college football world. Deion Sanders dominating at Jackson State, right? Coaching up a storm, recruiting up a storm. He got a couple of big-time recruits, a quarterback and a receiver, in this signing class, guys that don't ever go to HBCUs in modern football, and Deion's able to ink them. And while Deion's at Jackson State, over at another HBCU, you've got Eddie George coaching up Tennessee State. So now maybe the bug is spreading, the coaching fever. Rumor has it that the GOAT, the true greatest of all time, Jerry Rice, has interest potentially in getting into coaching. Could Jerry Rice make the jump just like Primetime and Eddie George? Can Jerry Rice jump into coaching? Jerry Rice bring Valley back to their glory days. Wouldn't that be interesting? How do you feel about the idea of more and more ex-players jumping into coaching later on in life? Not going directly into it like a lot of guys have had to do and climb the ladder, but we're talking about, Deion Sanders and Jerry Rice are 2 of the biggest names in the last 40 years of NFL football. Jerry Rice coming into the coaching ranks at the HBCU level? Could we see a revolutionary moment in college football with NIL deals changing the landscape to an extent and the playoffs forcing a division of even greater distance between the G5 and the P5, the haves and the have-nots? Could we see a reemergence of HBCU football at a level we haven't seen since what? Walter Payton? Could we see Jackson State, Tennessee State, Valley, Can we see some of these schools explode with high-profile coaching hires that then in turn bring in high-profile kids? It's an interesting discussion, what's happening at the HBCU level. Will Jerry Rice jump into the coaching waters? That's the question. 601-885-3776, the Ag Up Equipment text line. agup.com for a retail location nearest you. If you want to be a part of the show, text us your thoughts on the weekend. Any of the playoff games, 601-885-3776. Maybe you have a little thought on Ole Miss and MSU basketball. Maybe you have a thought on Jaxson Dart and Lane Kiffin posing in front of a rented Aston Martin in Oxford, Mississippi. Is Jaxson Dart going to be the next quarterback for the Ole Miss football Rebels? Would you rather have Luke Altmaier, who spent a year in the boat, so to speak? Jaxson Dart played 6 games intermittently at Southern Cal. Highly touted kid out of California. But he played 6 games in a different system with a interesting hodgepodge of a coaching staff. Now, the question truly is, when you bring a guy like Jaxson Dart in, what are you getting? A transfer quarterback the likes of a Joe Burrow, a Russell Wilson? Or are you getting a transfer quarterback the likes of, and this is no shade, but, you know, are you getting the Tommy Stevens? Right? You're getting Jeremiah Masol. Are you getting someone who is talented but not going to get you where you want to be? Is Luke Altmaier the long-term question or answer for the question for Ole Miss? It's very, very interesting how Lane Kiffin is handling this offseason. You go 10-2, you lose the bowl game because your quarterback goes down, 2 series in to the game? 3 series into the game? And that Baylor team was good. I'm not saying Ole Miss beats Baylor with Matt Corral in the game. I mean, I don't know. That was a good Baylor team. But you kind of got shortchanged to an extent in the bowl game. Recruiting didn't end the way you wanted it to in the first period. Now, they have made some hay in the transfer portal, but there's still a lot to go there, especially considering you have not inked the quarterback position. And that's, I mean, let's be honest, that's the position that pays the bills. It's what people want. They want the quarterback position to be secure. And so now you not only have to deal with a roster turnover of, I think, 35 contributors leaving, give or take, between transfer portal and the senior or underclassmen going to the draft. You lose your entire backfield. Matt Corral, all 3 running backs, Snoop, Parrish, and Ely, all gone. You lose a ton of offensive linemen. Now, reports are that Nick Brocker is coming back. Brocker. That's huge. Offensive lineman for Ole Miss. That is massive for the Rebels to bring back somebody like that, a leader on that offensive front. But now Lane Kiffin he's hired an OC to replace Jeff Lebby. Jeff Lebby, a top 5, maybe top 10 OC in the country, heads to Oklahoma to have full control of the offense. We heard that audio from Matt Corral last week. Lebby needed full control of the offense. So he's gone, and now Lane Kiffin has hired an OC who, with all due respect to Charlie Weiss Jr., if he wasn't Charlie Weiss Jr., you wouldn't know anything about him, and most of you still don't know anything about him, and rightfully so. He ran one of the worst offenses in the country at South Florida this year. Lane has a connection to Charlie Weiss Jr. They've worked together. Charlie Weiss Jr. is the safe hire at offensive coordinator for Lane Kiffin. Charlie Weiss Jr. is not Jeff Lebby when it comes to offensive game plan, when it comes to offensive scheme, when it comes to recruiting prolificness. He's not. You downgraded at OC is what it is. It happens. It's still Kiffin's offense. He will still be the mastermind behind the game plan. But not having a guy like Jeff Lebby, who I think it's pretty clear, was tantamount to running things behind the scene when it came to the offensive side of the football, whether it was the recruiting piece or whether, as Matt Corral said, it was Jeff Lebby running these quarterback camps with them, where, as Matt Corral said, Lane Kiffin was nowhere to be found. That's Jeff Lebby. I think we didn't really frame up well in the moment how much behind the scenes work Jeff Lebby was doing, because it always comes down to play calling in the game. We focus on the 4 hours on Saturday or the 4 hours on Sunday, right? And so we care about in-game play calling and in-game schematics. And those are things where we said, well, Lane Kiffin is the one who's making in-game decisions, okay? Lane Kiffin is – Jeff Lebby might be calling the play in verbally. Like, Jeff Lebby might be talking, but it's Lane Kiffin's decision. It's Lane Kiffin's wordage. It's Lane Kiffin's offense, okay? So that part we're not worried about. What you need to be concerned about if you're an Ole Miss fan is what happens behind the scenes. Can Charlie Weiss Jr. bring you the efficiency and the recruitability and the development piece that Jeff Lebby was doing behind the scenes, not only with Matt Corral in terms of development, but with the whole offensive roster in terms of recruiting? Charlie Weiss Jr. is not that guy. Not yet. Maybe he will be. Maybe he won't be. But you bring in a guy who's very unproven in Charlie Weiss Jr., who you're familiar with. It feels like a safe, familiar hire, and that's scary in college football and in the NFL. Familiarity can get you in trouble. And now you bring in, you've lost Kevin Smith, who Dave Bartu thought was an elite running backs coach because of the way he both developed running backs and also recruited. Again, the running back position is what it is, but it's about that recruiting piece. You lost Kevin Smith to Miami and Mario Cristobal. And now you've lost your DC to A&M. So not only did DJ Durkin leave, but you've now got to turn around and face him next year. And every year after that he's in College Station. So you lose a handful of coaches. You lose what feels like almost every major contributor on the roster. And your rehires now are Charlie Weiss Jr., which is a safe hire but not a great hire. And you've hired Chris Kiffin, your brother, who had a show cause at Ole Miss, has done his time. It's fine to come back, and no sweat off my back or anybody else's. But is that the best hire, right? He knows how to get it done on the recruiting side. So as long as he stays good, stays above board, you're good to go. Chris Kiffin can recruit. But can he coach? And who's going to be the DC? If you're an Ole Miss fan, are you really comfortable walking into the season with Charlie Weiss Jr. as your OC and a combination of Chris Partridge from Michigan, who is inside the building and would be a promotion, Chris Partridge and Chris Kiffin as your co-DCs? Two guys who have never called plays? I don't like that one bit. I don't like the idea of coming into the season with unproven guys at OC and DC. I mean, I know Lane can coach them up and can put together an offensive game plan, and he can schematically put his team in a great position to succeed. But boy, what a uninspiring coaching staff that would feel like. And I think Lane has every ability to go get the right guy. I do. And I think Lane can recruit when he wants to. But that's what Lebby brought you. He was your recruiter. He was your main guy. He led the charge. And maybe that will become Chris Kiffin. Maybe Chris Kiffin will be the guy moving forward. And it'll be A-okay. But it's an interesting... This is the part of program building that we don't talk about. It's what makes Nick Saban so elite. It's what we get to see at Clemson. Dabo Swinney just promoted from within across the board. Dabo had a nice little nest that was impervious. They weren't getting hurt by people leaving. He kept his OCs and his DC for years. And they built a beautiful, strong fortress, okay? And they won 2 titles, and they played for 4 in the span of, 6 seasons? It's incredible. Incredible. It's dynastic. That was a dynasty. For about 6 years, 7 years, maybe 8 years, Clemson has dominated. Now, it helped where they were. The ACC has been terrible. But what it came down to was Dabo didn't have to change anything. He didn't have to rebuild. Rebuilding your staff is the hardest part of this college coaching craziness, this silly season that we like to call it, the carousel. There's no doubt Kiffin knows offense. Can he rebuild his staff, right? That's the hardest part of building greatness, sustained greatness in college football. Kiffin has now proven he can do it in one season. They just won 10 games. It's an incredible feat. 10 regular season games. It had never happened. They're an injured quarterback away from being competitive in that bowl game. And really, Luke Altmaier still made Ole Miss competitive. But he wasn't Matt Corral, obviously. 10 wins. It's incredible. And I expect Lane Kiffin to have a good offense. The level of good is the question, and the level of step back for the defense is the question. Mike Leach has a ton of questions in Starkville. They're just not coaching staff questions. That's the difference. Believe me, the questions in Starkville, the roster, Ole Miss's roster this past season wasn't that much better than Mississippi State's, but it was a little bit better. And then you add in the QB, and that's a weight tipping formula, right? Matt Corral is going to win those games more often than not. End of discussion. Now Lane Kiffin has to totally flip that script, and you're either going to be starting Luke Altmaier or perhaps Jaxson Dart from Southern Cal, and we'll hear from David Johnson at 8:15. But it's that building of the staff. Look, Kirby has struggled to find the right mix of staff until this season, and he needed help around the country. Ask Ed Orgeron how hard it is to put a staff together. What Saban has done at Alabama, that is why we talk about these play callers now and these OCs and DCs the way that we do. What he has been able to do in Tuscaloosa in terms of bringing in the coaching staff that he does year in and year out and being able to make the right hires. Has he made mistakes? Yes. Obviously, Bill O'Brien and Pete Golding are not elite level play callers. But because he's able to complete his staff and build his staff year in and year out, that's why they're the dynasty they've been. It's pretty impressive. And we'll see what the text line is very clear. 601-885-3776. The Ag Up Equipment text line. You're listening to the Out of Bounds Show, ESPN 105.9 The Zone. The text line is clear. Ole Miss fans want to go get a good DC. They want to go hire somebody who has some oomph to them. And I think that's what Lane should do. That's what Ole Miss as a program should be. You're a good enough program to go get someone of some level of notoriety, some level of success, and bring them into what you're building in Oxford. Because I think Kiffin's building something good. And I think it can be very special. But you got to make the right hires. Ask Joe Moorhead. Ask Ed Orgeron. You got to make the right hires. ESPN 105.9 The Zone. This is the Out of Bounds Show. David Johnson, 8:15. They have another guest in the third hour as well. Cowboys, home again early in the playoffs. Your thoughts on the other side. Hour number 2 coming up.